Welcome to Money Talks with Cathy Yang, your intel in the Philippine markets and the economy. In the headlines, the haven bid is on as Trump tariffs weigh. The yen rallies to a 4-month high. U.S. 10-year Treasury yields fall. Will Philippine markets buckle? Transport Chief Vince Dizon pledges easier commutes for Filipinos. And our Vatican insider's recollection of Pope Francis' papal visit in the Philippines as the world's faithful continue to pray for his speedy recovery. The 10-year U.S. Treasury yield falls to its lowest level since December. As more signs emerge, the economy may be slowing. The benchmark 10-year Treasury yield slips nearly 10 basis points to 4.29%, while the 2-year Treasury yield by more than 6 basis points to 4.09%. Concerns are growing among investors due to the weak economic data and the growth impact of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff policies. Consumer confidence in the U.S. dropped to its lowest level since August 2021, and existing home sales in January declined. Trump is also pushing ahead with tariffs in Canada and Mexico when the month-long delay ends next week. Economic worries and tariff fears caused the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq to decline for the 4th consecutive session. Let's take a look at the numbers there. The Nasdaq dropping by over 1% and the S&P 500 slipping by nearly half of 1%. The Dow is up for a second straight day, though, by nearly half of 1%. Market watchers view the U.S. economy as vulnerable as consumer sentiment declines, recession fears reemerge, and tariffs in Canada and Mexico move forward next week. And let's take a look at the Japanese yen. The haven bid is on. It's risen to its strongest level in more than 4 months. The yen rising to as much as 0.8% to 148.57 per dollar on Tuesday. This is the yen's highest level since October of last year. Expectations of more interest rate hikes from the Bank of Japan boosted its appeal. This also follows Trump's plan to strengthen U.S. semiconductor curbs. And over in Malaysia, it sets a record in approved investments last year. Malaysian Trade Minister Tengku Safrul says the country hit 378.5 billion ringgit, or about $86 billion in 2024, up by nearly 15% from 2023. Tech giants like Google poured in digital investments, boosting the economy. The ringgit also became one of Asia's top-performing currencies. Meanwhile, foreign investments totaled more than 170 billion ringgit, led by the U.S., followed by Germany, China, and Singapore. The services sector had the biggest share, making up nearly 67% of the total. How Philippine markets are doing. Are they buckling or are they bucking the downturns? Let's take a look at the PSEI and how that's doing in the first 7 minutes of trading, first 3 minutes of trading. It has opened up by about 0.1% at 6,070. We're just below 6,100. It was down about 0.5% yesterday, with investors remaining worried about Trump's trade policies. Let's take a look at the peso and how that's opened. It has opened stronger today. 57.87, just a tad stronger there. Previous close was at 57.90 to the dollar. Those tariff fears have weakened the peso against the dollar, closing at 57.93 against the dollar. And with the haven bid on, what are our technical chartists seeing? Let's check in on Ron Acoba, the founder and chief investment strategist at Trading Edge. So good to see you, Ron, and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Ms. Cathy.
So I know you've got some charts to show us and make sense of it all, with all the Trump premium and the Trump factor. Let's take a look at the PSEI first and see how that's done. Not very pretty, as you can see the decline here on the chart. It's really been on a declining trend, and it's not very encouraging, is it? Since the start of the year, maybe 6-7% down. Where has my money gone? Oh my goodness! I mean, are we going to see a pivot right there? What are the charts telling you?
Well, currently we're actually still riding a 20% drawdown since it peaked at 7.5 back in October last year. So in the very, very near term, given the fact that it's still tracked tracking a mid-run downtrend, the bias may a little bit still be pointed to the downside. The silver lining, though, is that if you look at the PSEI from a longer-term perspective, you can see that it's actually nearing the lower band of its 4.5-year trading range, which suggests that a floor maybe. We may be nearing the floor
That's what
already.
we're looking for, the floor.
Yeah.
So there is a pivot there. I mean, what's the level right now? Because we're below 6,000.
So the floor where the PSEI managed to bounce at least 3 times in the past 3 to 4 years, we're somewhere around 5,700 to 6,000. We're at 6,000 now. So I'd say the downside may be limited to maybe just 300 points, if any. So
Well, let's take us back to memory lane there. You mentioned like 6-7 years, but I'm going to take you back to the midterm election years,
Yeah.
because it's a midterm election year this year, as it was back in 2018, 2013, and 2007. Make that 2019. And you see a double-digit gain there just before the global financial
Yeah.
crisis, right? I mean, that's a double-digit gain there. It seems like this year is going to be an outlier.
Well, so far the index is down, but we're still early in the year. And like I said, the bottom may already be nearing. There are a lot of catalysts that may be in effect moving forward, which will enable the index to finally recover, perhaps in the second half of the year. Midterm elections is one of that. The possible cut by the BSP and the U.S. Fed may be one of those catalysts that may finally prompt investor interest to come back in the market, to perhaps lead to a rally during the second part of the year.
Well, ever since the non-move by the Bangko Sentral on the key rate, not the triple R cut, I've seen the peso just strengthen to the
move
57
sideways,
to the
yes.
dollar. Let's take a look at the chart here. You said move sideways, but it's been like strengthening
Yeah,
every time
somewhat,
I open
yeah.
the show. So it's like 57 to the dollar there, bouncing up and down. But I have heard from city economist Joanna Chua that there is a chance that it may pivot and may
Yeah.
weaken. Is that what you're seeing in the charts?
For me, what I'm seeing is it actually has a chance to pivot, the U.S. dollar to peso exchange rate to pivot lower, meaning the peso to strengthen against the U.S. dollar. As you can see from its chart, it's just generally moving sideways, but somewhat relatively strengthening bit by bit relative to its 59 high. The key pivot is actually 57.50, and should that level gets violated, then we may see further downside for the exchange rate, meaning further strengthening for the peso. And one of the cues that may lead to a downside in the exchange rate is the recent decline in the U.S. Treasury.
That's true. That's true.
note.
You know, we've been
Yes.
monitoring that. Let's take a look at the U.S. Treasury yields here. Ever since Trump said, I'm going to bring this down, the long end of the curve, everybody's just been so fixated
Yeah.
with the 10-year yield in the U.S.
Well, for me, its recent movement is actually significant because it actually marks a pivot relative to its uptrend that we saw since the start of last year. So its decline below the 4.4% level may actually lead it to come down to perhaps 4% in the next few weeks or few months.
So what is that going to do then for our local 10-year Treasury? Because it's been
it's
following suit,
yeah.
right?
Well,
I've been seeing a decline as well.
Local treasuries actually just track the movement of U.S. treasuries, obviously with a little premium on how the U.S. is doing. So if we see, for example, U.S. treasuries decline to 4%, then we may likely expect local yields to decline as well.
Okay, we got about a minute here, and I got to put this in because it seems like this is where the fun is.
Yes.
It's in Bitcoin. Oh my goodness. Look at that fund there. The fund started when it hit like 110,000. We
Yes.
started the show at 110,000, and now I'm seeing like a 20% decline. Oh my gosh, that's painful, isn't it? I mean, for people who've invested their money, that's like a 20% drop.
Well,
Ever since Trump came to power.
if you want to be optimistic about it, if you look at it from a 1 year to 2 year point of view, it's generally still tracking a long run uptrend. But in between, you can see the fluctuations, right? 20% up here and there, 20% down here and there. So right now, it appears that that Bitcoin may be entering a corrective phase after it reached a high of 108 to $110,000 per Bitcoin. Given its decline below its key pivot level around 92 or 94,000 dollars, we may see it fall, unfortunately, to perhaps 76 to 80,000 in the very
you
near
gotta
term.
have a strong gut
I
for
know,
those
right?
fluctuations. It's like, oh my gosh, we're not used
Yeah.
to this. So where are we supposed to put our money then?
Well, if you're on the conservative end, I saw your recent interview with BDO Cap's chief. I agree that bonds remain to be a good investment vehicle to go into. Why? Because while rates may have come down relative to last year's high, it's still relatively higher, generally speaking. For example, 1 year bond yield locally is still doing what, 5.7, 5.8%. Obviously, the longer tenor offers a higher yield of perhaps 6 to 6.5%. Corporate bonds even offer as a high of 7 to 7.5%. So with that, it's actually if we see interest rates going down, let's say in the second half of the year, then locking those relatively high yields, it's actually an opportunity to do so at the moment. If you're on the riskier end, then you don't need to look any further. The PSEI, like I said, is trading near the bottom of its 4 to 5 year trading band. And I said, even if we see a downside, I think that it will just be limited to just 300 points or maybe 3 to 5%. With all the things lined up during the second half of the year, we may see finally rally at least to the midpoint, which is what, which is 6.6 or 6.7, which is 10% from where it is doing right now.
No right or wrong answers. Really depends on your risk appetite.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Ron, for joining us. Appreciate the time and the assessment.
Anytime.
As always, Trading Edge. Ron Acoba there joining us. And you're watching Money Talks on One News. Coming right up, a survey says more Filipinos are blaming business profits for high living costs. And the International Monetary Fund is saying AI could put at risk Filipino jobs in the BPO industry. Details after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. Here are the headlines from around the globe. The U.S. and Ukraine have agreed on a term of a draft minerals deal central to Kiev's push to win Washington support in ending the war with Russia. It is unclear whether the terms carry concrete U.S. security guarantees that Ukraine had sought. Trump has insisted on a minerals deal to repay billions of dollars in aid that Washington sent to Kiev. Trump says Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky may come to Washington on Friday to sign what he describes as a very big deal. In China, homegrown AI firm DeepSeek is planning to launch the successor of its January R1 model that sent shockwaves in the U.S. Called R2, the model intends to produce better coding and be more reasonable in languages beyond English. DeepSeek has accelerated the launch of R2 after the company initially scheduled a May 2025 release. And in the Vatican, spending his 12th day in the hospital, Pope Francis remains in critical condition but is stable and has not experienced any further respiratory crisis. Vatican officials say the Pope has met with his second-in-command, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, along with his deputy. Francis and Parolin discussed pending cases for sainthood and new appointments that required the Pope's approval. Filipino Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle led the prayer service for Francis in St. Peter's Square on Tuesday night, attended by pilgrims and senior church figures. Newly appointed Transport Secretary Vince Dizon says his overall goal is to make the Filipino commuter's life easier. In an interview, News 5's Ted Pailon and DJ Chacha on True FM, Dizon said he is backing privatization efforts to make this happen.
Layunin po niyan ay i-connecta yung mga iba't ibang modes. Unang-una yung MRT, MRT to busway, jeepney stop to busway and MRT.
Okay.
So ano po yan? Mga elevated walkway at mga covered walkway na dapat seamless po ang connection. Dapat po yan ma-implement at hindi po yan matagal na gawin. No? Tingin ko po, definitely within the term ni Pangulong Bongbong Marcos, matatapos po natin yan. Kailangan lang po talagang masimulan na.
Under ho ba ng DOTR yan?
Under po ng DOTR yan. It is a, official development assistance po yan galing sa ADB at matagal na pong pinlano yan at dapat i-implement.
As part of his initiatives, he also ordered the Toll Regulatory Board to suspend the full cashless toll system set for March 15th, citing the need to ensure the current system's efficiency. This marks the third postponement of the policy, originally scheduled for October 2023, but pushed to 2025 to allow toll operators and agencies more time to refine their systems.
Yung innovation, wala tayong problema dyan. Pero kailangan hindi to at the expense na mapeperwisyo ang motorista. Ang problema po natin dun sa cashless, sa pagmamadali ng cashless, nangyari na po yan eh. Kung naalala po natin, a few years ago, sinubukan po yung gawin sa NLEX tsaka sa SLEX. Ano po ang nangyari? Ang may alam po nito alam po nito ni Secretary Rex Gatchalian ng DSWD nung siya'y mayor ng Valenzuela. Ang nangyayari po dito, nagkaroon po ng Carmageddon. Ano ang naging resulta? Napuwersa po ang NLEX na itaas lahat ng barrier para lang makadaan. Hindi po na-implement ng mabuti. So, ang tanong ko po sa TRB nung binrip nila ako, yung bang sistema naayos na simula nung nagkabulbol, nung sinubukang i-implemento hanggang ngayon? Hindi po ako mabigyan ng siguradong sagot ng TRB. So ang sabi ko, why will we risk it? Bakit nating i-risk na mapirwisyo ulit ang mga motorista kung hindi naman tayo sigurado na yung mga problema dati naayos na ngayon?
A new survey shows most Filipinos blame big business profits for rising living costs. International research firm Ipsos found 77% of Filipinos see excessive profits as the key reason for high prices. Other factors include interest rates, global economic conditions, and government policies. Most Filipinos believe inflation will keep rising, while 10% expect their standard of living to improve. Despite concerns, many still consider their finances manageable. However, 9% say they are living comfortably. The International Monetary Fund warns that AI could displace some Filipino workers, especially in the business process outsourcing industry. The IMF said AI can take over routine and repetitive tasks, which could affect many roles in the sector. Data from the International Labor Organization shows 89% of the BPO workforce face a high risk of automation. With AI taking over customer service roles, experts warn of possible job losses. The BPO industry makes up 7.4% of the country's GDP in 2023, similar in magnitude to remittances, so changes may have spillover effects on the economy. In corporate news, Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation posted a net income of 9.5 billion pesos in 2024. The bank's net interest income grew 26%. Consumer loans jumped 40%. The bank says its consumer loan growth outpaced the industry. However, it did not disclose fourth quarter figures or full year income growth details. RCBC President and CEO Eugene Acevedo says data analytics and digital enhancements drove core economic growth. Meanwhile, shares rose 0.5% or 15 centavos, closing at 25.65 pesos each in yesterday's trading. Coming up after the break, an insider talks about the Pope's visit to the Philippines a decade ago as the faithful pray for his health. Money Talks returns after this short break. Keep it here on One News. As the faithful continue to pray for the health of Pope Francis, I spoke exclusively to Filipino priest Father Gregory Gaston. He's the rector of the Pontificio Colegio Filipino. In the second part of my conversation with him, he spoke about Pope Francis' similarities with his predecessors and what it was like traveling with the pontiff when he visited the Philippines in 2015.
It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Actually, I was, I think, with 11 other Filipinos in that papal trip. No? So it began here in Rome with a little orientation, I think, for 3 days. No? The other journalists were here. And then I helped them, of course, no, with the Italian. I was the one translating for them. All the indications, all the plans, even the materials were all in Italian. It was a beautiful experience. And it was also would give you a sense. It would give you a sense of closeness with the Holy Father. For example, from Rome to Sri Lanka, I think 30 minutes into the flight, the Pope appeared at the left. He greeted all of us using the microphone of the plane, and then he went down the aisle and shook hands with each one of us, with each of the journalists. So he went one by one, greeting us, chatting a bit. I gave him some copies of my little booklets for altar servers, and then he continued on his way. And then that picture that you mentioned on CBCP News, that was taken on the last leg, meaning from Rome back, from Manila back to Rome on Philippine Airlines. And actually, I requested for a group photo with the Pope, with the Filipino journalists, but the one in charge, the priest in charge, Padre Lombardi at that time, he told us to, well, just wait, no? So I thought he would be calling us as a group, but then he started calling us one by one, one by one, to be seated there with the Pope and then to have our pictures.
You've been ordained as a priest by St. John Paul II back in 1993. So that's one blessing. And you've had at least 10 years to experience working with Pope Francis. I'm wondering what similarities or differences, if you will, you're finding between the two, as both of them have really ended up endearing themselves to Filipinos here and around the world.
Yes, Cathy. Actually, when Pope John Paul died, because he was Pope since 1978, if I'm not mistaken, and until 2005. So the people were so used to Pope John Paul that maybe we had this little feeling, we were wondering how Pope Benedict would be. And then some of us would think that, well, he was like Pope John Paul, maybe he was a scholar. Pope John Paul was also a scholar. He had a lot of publications. And then Pope Benedict as well, he has his collections and all these things as a theologian prior to becoming a pope. So at least personally, I was thinking, maybe everything would be similar to John Paul. But then I also realized later that, well, every pope, just like every person, would have his or her own personality.
But right now, as rector of the Pontificio Colegio Filipino, what are you doing to keep the faithful in prayer?
So my role is very simple. I just try to facilitate things so that our priests could do whatever they would have to do. So meaning their ongoing formation, spiritual life, even physical here, community life, the food, the kitchen, a little bit the garden as well, no? Just to maintain a little, and the building, the renovations, all these things. And also make sure that they could study. So we have our library, we could also, we have access to the libraries in the universities. And then when it comes to prayer life, every Sunday, you know how many masses we celebrate for the Filipinos? Every Sunday in Rome alone, 60 masses, 50 to 60 masses for the Filipinos. And then yesterday was a Sunday, so we had many masses. And that was also the opportunity, the time for us to pray for Pope Francis in all those masses. Even here at Colegio Filipino, we had the 8 o'clock Sunday Mass. We also prayed for Pope Francis.
That was Filipino priest Father Gregory Gaston speaking to me earlier from Rome. Let's continue to pray for the speedy recovery of Pope Francis. And that is it for Money Talks with Cathy Yang. Catch us again tomorrow, Thursday at 9:30 a.m. here on One News. We're also streamed live